Hey everyone, Danny here with Vader Dad Builds. I needed to get a metallic finish on my 3D prints to upgrade my Mandalorian cosplay armor. There are plenty of tutorials using this graphite powder to do just that, but what I noticed is everyone has a slightly different way of finishing the process. Here are a few of the differences that I've seen. Using a clear coat or not, 1 or 2 passes of graphite, and which paint color to use as a base. So I wanted to try some of these options for myself to see what works best. But first we need to get a smooth finish, so let's get started. Thanks to a viewer's suggestion in my Scout Trooper helmet video, I made a change to my process to get a smooth surface. The first step to getting a smooth finish is a rough sanding pass. I use 120 grit sandpaper for this. You will still have a rough surface, but the 120 grit will sand down the PLA pretty quickly. Second step is a filler primer. You want to get a thick layer of filler primer to get into those layer lines. I'm doing 3 coats of primer to be sure to fill in those lower areas. It's much easier to sand down primer than to sand down PLA. Third step is a second sanding pass. Now I'm using the 320 grit sandpaper. After sanding, I move on to the next step, spot putty. When applying the spot putty, be sure you're in a well-ventilated area and are using gloves. I use a plastic squeegee to apply the spot putty. You don't need to apply this to the whole print, just the areas that are still rough. The next step is another sanding pass. In this step, I'm using the 320 grit sandpaper again to sand down the spot putty. At this point, you can do another primer pass or more spot putty as needed. I decided to do one more primer pass. Now on to the final sanding passes. I start by using the 600 grit sandpaper. After I finish with the torso, I sand the chest piece. Once I'm done with the 600 grit sandpaper, I will do a wet sanding pass. For the wet sand, I use 1000 grit sandpaper. It is best to sand in a circular motion. Alright, now I'm done with the primer, Bondo, and sanding. I'm really happy with how these came out. They came out really smooth, and now they're ready for painting. Before choosing the base color, I recommend doing a test first. I have a few plastic spoons here that I painted in white, gray, and black. I'll test the graphite powder on each of those to see which one I like the best. I have my Mando helmet that I bought a few years ago, and I want to match to that. So here's the white, and here's the black, and here's the gray. I think the gray is a better match, so that's the one I want to go with. As I mentioned, I'm using a gray gloss as a base. Start by painting a few light coats. The final coat will be a little thicker, but be sure not to make it too thick where it causes runs in the paint. Be sure to read and follow the directions on the can as well. Now between this point and finishing the entire process, you need to be very careful not to touch the surface or you'll get fingerprints. You'll notice that I'll be using gloves from now on at any time I'm handling the parts. After the paint is fully cured, it's time to apply the graphite powder. I'm using a makeup sponge that I got for $2 at Target. I recommend this over cotton balls or cotton pads so you don't have any fibers coming off. First I apply some loose powder, then I start rubbing it in, going in circles. You'll want to be sure to cover the full surface and buff it in as much as possible. It really is amazing how well this graphite powder works. You can see how half of this print now looks like metal when the other half still looks like plastic. You may start to notice some small imperfections in the surface after you add the metallic finish. Since it is reflecting light, it's not very forgiving if your print is not perfectly smooth. It's up to you how much time you want to spend on the prep work and the steps I went over earlier. Even though I'm seeing these imperfections, I'm still really happy with how it's coming out. After this, I like to use a microfiber cloth to make sure there's no loose powder left. Now I'm doing a clear coat. Be sure that you do 2 very light sprays before doing a heavier final coat. And same as the paint, if you go too thick, the clear coat may run. That's something you definitely don't want at this point. You'll also notice that the clear coat starts to dull the silver look of the graphite. That's why we'll be doing another layer of graphite on top of this clear coat. Wait about 5 to 6 hours before you start adding another layer of graphite. You still want the clear coat to be soft so the graphite gets into it. You want to be firm but still careful when rubbing in the graphite. Once you're done here, then let the part sit for another day and a half to be sure the clear coat is fully cured before handling. I want to try one slightly different method to show you the difference. On this shoulder armor right here, what I'm going to do is paint, clear coat, and then put one layer of graphite in when the clear coat's still soft. So let's see how that turns out. I'll go through these steps a little quicker this time. I paint just like I did the first time with the gray gloss. After the paint dries, I do a very light wet sand with a 1500 grit sandpaper. Then I do a clear coat the same way I did the first time. I wait the same 5 to 6 hours before applying the graphite. I'd have to say the Mudhorn skull looks pretty awesome in silver. Alright, now we have everything finished. Here is the chest and torso. And here's the shoulder armor. Now let me show you the differences between the finishes. It's harder to tell on the screen than in person, but when you do 2 passes of graphite it does look more silver. I prefer this over the 1 pass of graphite option. As far as fingerprints go, it is also hard to tell on the screen. With the 2 passes of graphite, I don't see any fingerprints. With 1 pass of graphite, you do get some fingerprints, but it isn't that noticeable. On this piece, I'll end up doing another clear coat and another pass of graphite as well. Here's a summary of what I've learned in these processes. I hope you found this video helpful, and if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe and notification buttons, and check out this video next. Thank you for watching.